I know we have some pretty exciting news to share that this paid time leave bill was signed off on by Governor Newsom. So tell us a little bit about what is in this. What do people need to know?
Yeah, this bill is an important bill that closes some of the gaps in protections for workers related to COVID-19 that lapsed back in December. So this bill is retroactive in its implementation going back to January 1st of 2021 and allows workers to take up to 80 hours of paid sick leave for coronavirus related reasons. This includes being quarantined. This includes getting the vaccine and recovering from the vaccination, as well as a COVID-19 diagnosis.
Right. So it's not even just those, if you're experiencing symptoms or if you're sick in the hospital with COVID, but it's also if you need to go book a vaccine appointment too.
That's right. I think our legislature was understanding the changing dynamics of the pandemic and that workers want to be able to take that time off to get the vaccine to protect themselves, and they should be paid for that time since it protects the public health as well. It also protects workers whose childcare or school facilities are closed due to the pandemic. So for example, when schools reopen or if schools are already reopened and there's an outbreak of COVID-19 and the parent has to stay home again to care for the child, they will be able to access those paid sick days as well.
So what was your reaction when you heard that this was finally signed off on after almost a full 3 months of waiting?
It was quite a relief to us, and we are excited to call the workers that we've been speaking to since January who weren't sure about their ability to recover payment for the time that they took off related to COVID-19.
And so the retroactive part of this, I know that that means a lot to quite a few people that have had to take time off since the beginning of 2021. Can you explain, and from some experts I've heard, they've said, it was a bit of a surprise that the wording of retroactive was even included with this at all. So can you explain kind of what that means and why that is kind of a big deal right now?
Yes, typically the legislature doesn't do bills retroactively. Luckily, this one is retroactive. It still had ramifications for them waiting to pass it. When we got reports from workers who had just been advised to quarantine but weren't experiencing any symptoms, they were trying to make the decision whether they missed time that would go unpaid or whether they would violate that quarantine order and go ahead and go to work. It's a difficult decision when you're relying paycheck to paycheck and jobs are so scarce right now. So it's nice that the legislature recognized workers who did sacrifice those weeks of pay in order to do what's right and quarantine or take the time off after a positive diagnosis, and allows them to recover the money that they lost as a result.
Can you speak on who is not included on this? I realize I was doing a little bit of research and I heard that this doesn't include some of our rideshare drivers. Can you speak on that?
The biggest carve out for this bill is actually employers with 25 or fewer employees. So the federal bill that we had in place in 2020 that expired December 31st, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, covered small employers from 0 employees or 1 employee, who is the one who's sick, until 500 employees. So those workplaces that have 25 or fewer are not covered by this bill. And that's a large portion of California's workers, and in particularly our service workers, small restaurants that have been operating. Most of those places of employment are 25 or fewer. Rideshare drivers are not covered by virtue of Prop 22. They are not considered an employee anymore, and therefore this bill only applies to employees and not independent contractors.
Wow, interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah, just double checking the definition because this went back and forth at the legislature. Just want to make sure.
So you tracked this all the way through?
Oh, we've been tracking this bill since before it was written. We posted extensively on social media in December. called members of the legislature, Labor Workforce Development Agency, the governor's office, trying to get them to enact something before the former legislation expired. It was really difficult telling workers they weren't covered by paid sick leave during the height of the pandemic. So yes, we have been, as soon as this bill became announced as a potential legislation that the governor was going to sign, we have been following it throughout, hoping that it covers as many workers as possible.
And this is a pretty huge, wide range of folks. We're talking about thousands upon thousands of workers across the state of California. Am I correct here?
Yeah, that's right. And it is fairly long lasting. It lasts through to September, which is great because we don't know what the pandemic's going to do while the vaccines continue to be rolled out. And as places reopen and more vaccinations are provided, what kind of resurgence we'll see, especially in those communities that have a lower vaccination rate. So it's really important for workers to have that protection remaining while we're still in an emergency situation.
I'll ask you this question because one of the characters that we're including in our story tonight, she is technically considered a temp worker, but she is contracted in with her company. So she works 40 hours a week. She's not just one of those people who fills in, 5 hours a week here, 10 hours here. She's a full 40 hours a week. And she came to us kind of seeking to see if she was covered, since she had to take 10 unexpected days off in the middle of the month in March. And she's like, I have to pay rent. I have student loans. I can't afford to do this unpaid for something that was obviously not my choice. So does it cover her? Would it cover her situation?
Yes, most temp workers are considered employees and therefore covered by the ordinance, the legislation. What the Labor Commissioner will do, which is the enforcement agency, is they will determine who is the employer that's responsible for providing the sick days. So often temporary employees have 2 layers of employment: the temp agency that they get the jobs through and the employer that they're doing the work with. So the Labor Commission will be the one that decides ultimately which of those 2 entities must foot the bill for those days off.
Great, awesome. Any other key bits of information that you think the community needs to know about this, both employees and employers?
I think it's important to know that it doesn't require a doctor's note to take these days. So although a positive diagnosis is one of the reasons that you can take these days, if the CDC recommends you quarantine and with a positive diagnosis you do, you don't have to provide that actual proof of a positive test in order to be accessing these days.
And then I spoke to a lawyer about this earlier, and I wanted to run this by you. Is it true that for retroactive payments, employees have to physically or like personally go in and request that money? They're not just going to automatically get it in their next paycheck on the 29th. Do they have to make that request?
Yes, it does appear that the employees will have to request the payment for their COVID time off. Partly this has to do with the fact that they weren't able to exert the rights when it happened. So they may or may not have even let their employer know that the reason that they were off was COVID related. But now if they do want to be paid, they do have to ask for the time.
And I just kind of personally speaking, I know you've been tracking this pretty extensively since, like you said, even before it was written. I'm sure that you and your team are breathing a bit of a sigh of relief, hopefully right now. Can you just speak on personally how you're feeling about this?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great win for California's workers to have a safe recovery from the pandemic as we move through these months. Obviously, it still is difficult to reflect on the last few months that we didn't have this coverage. So, with every step forward, we have to remember that we could have done better. And that's tough for the workers that really had to make those difficult decisions and they shouldn't have. But we're excited to be calling our workers now, especially our food sector workers, about the ability to get a vaccine. And now we can tell them that they're able to get paid for that time off. And if they need to recover, they'll also be paid for that time.